This was the procedure when a new Mejlis met. The previous prime minister was supposed to present to the new Mejlis his cabinet. When he did that, he was already, of course, prime minister, but he presented his new cabinet. He kept the portfolio of the war ministry for himself, right, which he was entitled to do that. But since 1941, the Shah had always appointed the war minister.
Right.
So the Shah had always been very careful that the military should be in his hands, not in the hands of politicians. So when Mosaddeq appointed himself as the portfolio of the Ministry of War, the Shah, of course, refused. And this is when Ghawam was elected prime minister, and that caused Siatir, the uprising of Siatir. And as a result of the uprising, basically, Ghawam fell after 3 days. There was a lot of bloodshed. Ghawam resigned. Mosaddeq came back into power with his own cabinet, having the portfolio. He could then, for the first time, appoint the chief of staff of the military. And he also got the 6-month special powers to decree laws. These are not finalized laws, but decrees of reform. So in the next actually year or so, he passed something like 180 reform acts, things such as land reform, electoral reform, tax reform. So they're quite impressive reforms. But again, these special powers led some people to say he was having dictatorial powers. You can't say that because many democracies often have the chief executive pass special, basically, decrees. But before they passed into legislation, Parliament or Mejlis would have to actually okay it. So these were temporary measures which the Mejlis would eventually either veto or agree to. Right. So with special powers, basically, what the strategy of the Shah, the US, UK, had been to remove Mosaddeq through Parliament failed. And once it failed, then they started talking about basically a military coup.
After the Siatir July 22nd event, the chairman of the parliament was Ayatollah Kashani, right?
For a short while, yeah.
So then we know that Kashani got separated with Mosaddeq specifically after the July 22nd, 1952 event. And then after General Afshar II's murder, he basically let General Zahedi take sanctuary inside the parliament buildings. And we could see like some direct opposition inside the parliament with Mossaddeq's government. I want to ask basically that are there any other attempts of the UK-US to either bribe or somehow encourage the parliament through either through its chairman or through other representatives to one more time try their effort to even weakening or like opposing the Mossaddeq's government?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, I think because of this basically overall strategy of focusing on the Mejlis, what both the British and the American embassies did was they cultivated very carefully prominent figures, Kashani, of course, Baraya, Maki. And the reports actually explicitly say that we have to divide the National Front. And these are the people who could be easily basically drawn. With Kashani, they did talk about that money could work. With Maki, it was often the idea that the Shah actually wants to tell Maki that, we need a younger prime minister, leaving the impression that he would be the suitable prime minister to replace Mossaddeq. And we also know, Henderson, the American ambassador, had long private meetings with Baraya and Kashani. And I know with Kashani, they talked about, he was a great leader, not just of Iran, of the Muslim world and so on. They were clearly buttering him up, basically to draw him away from Mossaddeq. There was conflicts between Kashani and Mossaddeq, mainly over personnel. Kashani wanted his family members or his entourage to be in the cabinet or in the Mejlis, and Mossaddeq wanted more people who were from the Iran party, who had professionals and technocrats to take those positions. So there was this friction, but what the British and Americans did is very carefully cultivated differences and to draw them in. So often, the controversy about Kashani is whether he actually participated in the 28 Mordad coup. My conclusion is that he was not involved in 28 Mordad, in the actual coup, but what he was used for was to undermine Mossaddeq in the Mejlis. So his role there, because he had actually about 5 or 6 deputies supporting him in the Mejlis. He never participated in the Mejlis. That was considered below him to participate in the Mejlis. But he did have some followers, in at least 5 deputies from Tabriz in the Mejlis to support. So some of their votes could have been then joined to the opposition to Mossaddeq. You also see, you can see in the dispatches, the American embassy was constantly sending visitors from the United States, clearly journalists, senators, congressmen, also George Lechovsky, who is a professor at Berkeley, who is also a CIA analyst, to go and have long talks with Kashani. We don't know what they said behind doors, but the fact that they were spending a lot of time meeting privately Kashani at Kashani's home, there was something going on. So one reason I think Kashani was not actually involved in 28 Mordad is there is one document written by Kermit Roosevelt on actually blow-by-blow account of the coup. And there was one paragraph that was kept classified until very recently. And we used to think that one paragraph was basically to do with clerics and the Chagokeshan, and that Kashani would fit there. Finally, that paragraph was declassified, and Kashani's name is not there. It's Ayatollah Behbahani was the conduit for American dollars going to the mob in southern Tehran. So Kashani is not mentioned, and also Kermit Roosevelt says that very few people were in the know of what was happening in 28 Mordad, and he doesn't name Kashani among those few. So it wasn't like Kashani wouldn't have participated, but I don't think the Americans trusted Kashani enough to have him in the loop of the actual coup.
If we accept that Kashani wasn't directly present during the 28 Mordad coup, he was supporting the one of or some of at least the players of the coup, such as General Zahedi after General Afshar II's murder. Did he get involved in the coup indirectly, or we still can say that he wasn't under the effect of the UK-US manipulation? He was just trying to oppose Mossaddeq's government after the July 22nd.
No, from the American dispatches, we know that he was in contact with Zahedi. Zahedi had promised Kashani that once he became prime minister, he would give 3 cabinet posts to Kashani's supporters.
Okay.
That was there. But also Zahedi had also assured the Americans they would never do that. So Kashani was being taken for a ride there.
Okay. So I also wanted to ask one other aspect of this story. So if we accept that UK-US was trying to affect the representative of the parliament, one question coming into the mind is that when we're getting closer to the August 1953 referendum of the dissolution of the parliament that Mossaddeq's government ran at that time, we see that some of the representatives resigned their roles, their seats, in support of Mossaddeq's government, specifically when Abdullah Muazzami was the chairman of the Mejlis. If we accept that UK-US was trying to somehow bribe or like affect the representatives inside the parliament, how we could analyze or interpret this resignment of the representatives at that time?
Well, actually, I mean, this is interesting but complicated. What happened was, once it was clear that the opposition to Mossaddeq was not enough to bring down the government, they couldn't get enough vote of no confidence. What their strategy that they developed, and here you can see the American embassy is very much involved in the British were no longer involved because the diplomatic ties had been broken. Yes. But the American embassy, the strategy they developed is again very Machiavellian, is that basically obstructionism to prevent any legislation being passed. So they had enough block of votes. They didn't have enough block of votes to overthrow the government, but they had enough block of votes to prevent a quorum meeting of the Mejlis. Right. So the government had 180 bills to present to the Mejlis. It also had the report of the Committee of Eight, which basically it looked at the constitutional conflict between the monarch and the prime minister, and it concluded that actually the prime minister was right in that conflict. So they had that report. But every time the government wanted to introduce its reform bills or the Committee of Eight report, the opposition would go out and say, you know, we have immediate urgent business, or we have to go on a pilgrimage to Qom or Mashhad. The quorum would be lost. And so parliamentary politics basically came to a complete standstill.
Right.
So the strategy then, Mossaddeq's strategy, was to ask his supporters, the bloc of supporters, I think it was about 52 deputies, to resign, so that by the resignation of the Mejlis, then they could call for new elections for the 18th Mejlis.
Okay, so like besides of those opposition, still there were some like representatives who were the either like the members of the National Front or the supporters of the Mossaddeq who followed the resignment request through Mossaddeq.
Yes, yeah. But here was again the parliamentary rules, statutes, which is very complicated, but people often were not aware of it. A deputy could resign, but that resignation is not formalized and accepted unless the Mejlis itself accepts it. Right. So these 52 deputies resigned, but according to the statutes of the Mejlis, they hadn't resigned. So the Mejlis was still there.
Right.
So the result Mossaddeq took, which is then outside the constitution, was to resort to a referendum. The referendum ending the Mejlis and calling for elections for the new Mejlis.